Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining me tonight. This is your host, Brother T, back with you for another episode of A Course in Miracles. We're going to be studying the Black Pearl book, the one you see on your screen right now. And you're probably noticing a little bit different background. That background is Asilomar, which is out on the west coast of the United States in California. And it's a beautiful park there that my wife and I went to visit last year and for a spiritual convention. And we really enjoyed it. We had a really good time. So as you can see, I've got a few things kind of changed around, and I appreciate your patience with me as we continue to progress, if you will, in our technical efforts. And so we're just going to change a few things around tonight, and I really appreciate you being here, and I hope the experience is more pleasant for you. And let me just check my stream here to see. It looks like everything seems to be flowing along pretty well. So that's kind of where we are in my growth. My leading edge is to get the technology working so that we're all kind of having an experience here together without a lot of technical distractions, if you will. So tonight we're going to be discussing the episode that we really kind of already talked about. Well, I had it up on the screen. It's called Conflict and the Ego. And this is from the textbook. It's chapter 3, section 6. We just finished last week. We finished the section 5. So we're just going to kind of jump into that tonight. So I'll just put the information up on screen for you so that we can kind of read along. I've got some content. We're going to just kind of go through and see how far we get with it tonight. I don't know if we'll get through everything I've got, but I think it's possible that we will. And hopefully we'll have some good conversations along the way as well. So chapter 3, Retraining the Mind, is what the title is for chapter 3. And the conflict and the ego is the discussion that we're going to engage in tonight, section 6. And I'm just looking in my book here real quick, just to give you the page number is 46. If you're looking at this version here, the Course in Miracles version. Now the difference between this one and the blue book, if you're just joining in for the first time, the difference between this one and the blue book is that Ken Wapnick worked with Helen Schachtman, and they decided that some of the material, and especially in the first 5 chapters or so, was they felt like I think he really felt like it was intended just for her, and so they took out some of the material. Again, through the first 5 chapters, there was almost over 20, almost 25% that had been removed. And so this is the Your Text version. You can find it at jcim.net, and you can actually read it online if you don't have a copy. But you'll notice, like in this first paragraph here that we're talking about tonight, the soul knows, loves, and creates is in parentheses. And that's because that was removed from that version called the Foundation for Inner Peace version. Nothing wrong with it. I mean, I studied that version for years, literally, before I became aware that this book was available. And there was, back in the day, there was also, it was still in the courts as to whether or not this work was public domain and could be used, and so now, and it did become public domain because a copy of this work was given to a university. The original Your Text version was given to a university. So I even saw a copy that was published by Barnes & Noble. They had printed a copy and was making it available in their stores. I noticed that copy a few years ago. But anyway, the Your Text version has everything in it. And that's my teacher, my mentor, my brother is the one who kind of helped me to see it from that perspective. So that's why I like reading this version, and there are some things that are quite relevant actually in this version that were taken out that we're going to be bumping into and discussing. So the soul knows, loves, and creates. These are its unequivocal functions. The abilities man now possesses are only shadows of his real strengths. All of his functions are equivocal and open to question or doubt. So have you ever, maybe you're already familiar with the word equivocal, but I just thought I would bring it up, right? I went and checked out the dictionary.com online. So the adjective equivocal says allowing the possibility of several different meanings as a word or phrase, especially with intent to deceive or misguide. Susceptible of double interpretation, deliberately ambiguous. And then we have of doubtful nature or character, questionable, dubious, suspicious, of uncertain significance, not determined. So let's go back and look at this again. The soul knows, loves, and creates. These are its unequivocal functions. So that's saying that there's no deceit in that, okay? There is no doubtful nature of the soul, what the soul knows. In other words, the truth is true, and only the truth is true. Of course, I'm adding that, right? But man, we see here, the abilities man now possesses are only shadows of his real strengths. We really contracted ourselves into physical form, literally as spirit. And by doing that, what we've done is limited our abilities dramatically. And we've had to resort to weird things like speaking, right? And, and using words, right? Instead of energies to communicate, and feelings and vibrations and frequencies and things like that. Interesting, right? So all of his functions, man's functions, are equivocal, which means that they're all susceptible, questionable, dubious, suspicious, right? And open to question or doubt. All of his functions. So that's really the human self, if you will. So doesn't it raise some concern when we think about how literally we've allowed some of our, well, for lack of a better term, I'm just going to say religious institutions to kind of create God in man's image. And so how many people through the ages have just become, literally just want to move away, just step away completely from religion because of the fact that it's questionable and it seems to change up on you. And God, if you will, if we give those attributes to God, then then it's hard to trust, right? We want to trust God, right? And so that, maybe that was the genesis for the whole idea of just being fearful of God, right? Because we can't predict what God's going to do. But Jesus is very clear in this teaching called A Course in Miracles that is totally not the case. The soul, which is nothing more than your right mind, your true self, your higher self, knows, loves, and creates humans, men and women. We make, right? We make things, and they're all temporal. They're all temporary. And as soon as we're created, they begin to disappear or disintegrate and fall apart. So all of our functions are equivocal and open to question or doubt. This is because we are not certain how we will use them, our functions. Conflict and the ego. So let's read along a little bit more here before we get into any more discussion at this point. He, man, is therefore incapable of knowledge, being uncertain. He is also incapable of knowledge because he can perceive lovelessly. He cannot create surely because his perception deceives. Perception did not exist until the separation had introduced degrees, aspects, and intervals. The soul, capital S soul, has until the separation, and this is a much better way of looking at the separation, of looking at what's been called the fall, I think it's much more appropriate to call it the separation, because we didn't really fall, other than maybe we fell asleep, if you want to look at it from that perspective. But when you fall asleep, that's not really no major error, right? It's just a shift of consciousness, a shift of perception, a shift of dimensional experience. But it's not sin, or it's not something that should be punished, or that you would be held guilty for, because guilt is also of man. Judgment is of man, the human self. And we begin to really see that love itself, if God indeed is love and God is indeed love, has no attributes. It just is. And we lay our thinking and our judgments on top of everything that we experience. Even love, we have defined it, and we have been equivocal in that, because we change up on it all the time, our perception of what love is. Pretty bizarre, actually. Perception did not exist until the fall. The separation, if you will, had introduced degrees, aspects, and intervals. Before that, there was just wholeness. There was only oneness. There was only you and I, if you will, as children of God, being one with God. In other words, God's thoughts were our thoughts. We were experiencing and echoing back, if you will, through our absolute recognition of God, of love, of the thoughts, if we would call it that, the energy, the vibration, the resonance of creation, of this ever-expanding energy, of this beautiful thing called love. The soul has no levels, and all conflict arises from the concept of levels. Only the levels of the Trinity are capable of unity. The levels which man created by the separation cannot but conflict. Cannot but conflict. The levels which man created by the separation cannot but conflict. So the lines and levels and degrees, definitions, and we can really even call those perceptions, levels and lines of different perceptions. Because the truth is, we're just making shit up. We're making it up. We're making life up. We're making up the definitions of what we believe is appropriate or inappropriate, or good or bad, or right or wrong, guilty or not guilty. We're making all of that up, literally, and we keep changing it, right? You don't have to go back too far in your own history to realize that you see quite a few things today differently than you did even certainly a few years ago, or months ago, or even weeks ago. I mean, how many of us were seeing the world completely different just a few weeks ago before this pandemic called COVID-19? And how many of us now are beginning to judge in a new way? We may have started out thinking, okay, well, maybe our governance system has good intentions and they're really trying to protect us, and now there's a whole group of people, if you will, of opinions and perceptions that are quite convinced that we've been hoodwinked, and that we're being taken advantage of, and maybe we're being set up for something, and whatever, right? That we could be victimized. And those are some ideas that have sprang forth, and groups of people are beginning to organize, and people in governance are beginning to penalize, and it varies from state to state. I was telling my wife I'm actually pretty happy that the state that we're living in has been fairly non-restrictive of movement. Not that they're not trying to be supportive of, us respecting people and caring for people that might be vulnerable to something, if that we might be, a cause for them to be susceptible to something. But I mean, as far as I know, almost everybody's been fairly isolated for 2 months now, right? But there are some places in our country today, and if you're just getting, if you're watching this at some time in the future, today is actually only the 7th of May, and the last 2 months have just been, completely different, a completely different perception of what life is and what we're supposed to be like in it, and how we're supposed to be in our relationships with each other, and our conduct and our behaviors. Some people's at least is called into question, and et cetera, et cetera. So can you see then how our functions are equivocal and open to question or doubt? And the functions that we apply here are thinking and judgment. That's what we apply as the lines and levels and degrees that we apply to our experience here. Quite strange indeed. So let's continue. The levels which man created by the separation cannot but conflict. This is because they are essentially meaningless to each other. We're going to let maybe the Course teach us a little bit more. We'll leave that where it's at for the moment. Freud realized this perfectly, and that is why he conceived the different levels in his view of the psyche as forever irreconcilable. They were conflict prone, these levels, these different levels of the psychic, right? They were conflict prone by definition because they wanted different things and obeyed different principles. In our picture of the psyche, there is an unconscious level which properly consists only of the miracle ability and which should be under my direction. Now, this is Jesus communicating to us. Could we say that he was communicating maybe because Helen Schachtman was a psychologist and worked at Columbia University, that he was communicating directly to her, and this was only for her ears? You could make that argument if you want to, but this is for all of us. Everyone, really, can consider these important foundational principles. It's not beyond us to recognize that. But if Jesus was saying that to her, he's also saying that to you, right? That it's under his direction, these miracles, abilities. And there is also a conscious level, and that's the level that we're operating at right now, right? You and I, we're operating at this conscious level. And we've touched on this before already in our previous chapters. We talked about the subconscious and the conscious, and you may recall the superconscious. Again, the lines, levels, and degrees are irreconcilable in us, we believe, at least. So there is also a conscious level which perceives or is aware of impulses from both the unconscious and the superconscious. Consciousness is thus the level of perception, but not of knowledge. Again, to perceive is not to know. So I'm going to back up just a little bit. I want to say that, just for the sake of conversation, if we're just considering those three levels, the superconscious, the conscious, and the unconscious, I want to kind of throw in a little bit of a mix here and ask a question. Are we conscious when we are dreaming at night? What would you say? What would you say? Are you conscious? Can you see maybe that your consciousness is maybe somewhat limited a little bit? What about, do we have the full range of consciousness when we're sleeping at night that we do now? We would probably argue no. You wouldn't probably argue too much with me, would you, if I said no? Not really. You're not even aware are you that you're safe at home in bed? You think you're just living life, and it's normal. The way that you're living that life is normal. This conscious self, this self that we're having this experience with right now, is also quite limited. We're limited to the three dimensions, we're limited to space and time, but even those are constructs of the mind. And we carry that right into our sleeping self at night. However, I argue sometimes that we're really not conscious of time in that dimension. We've kind of let that go too. Have you found yourself using your cell phone, talking to somebody in your dreams at night? I mean, I see people all the time that are, I mean, they're really difficult for them to lay down their phone. You know, I mean, we go out and about, you know, well, at least before the before the COVID experience, you know, people walking around and they're you know, they're in their phone all the time. It's like it's right there all the time. Everything is lived through that phone. But you know, when I have dreams at night, I don't know what about you? Leave a comment if you care to in the in the stream tonight if you care to. What about you? Do you you ever find yourself sleeping and dreaming, and in your dreams that you're actually talking to somebody on the phone or concerned about time? I do remember one time when I was trying to buy an airplane ticket at a counter, and I was concerned about time because I was afraid I was going to miss my flight, but I couldn't find money, and you know, I was kind of freaking out, and I also couldn't I couldn't remember where I was going to go. In other words, it suddenly dawned on me. I remember the dream, and it suddenly dawned on me that where am I even going? I don't even know where I'm going. I was almost kind of in a state of panic to get ticketed. And, you know, I was concerned about the money part of it and getting the ticket and getting to the, you know, to the gateway, but I didn't even know where, you know, when it dawned on me, I didn't even know where I was going. And that's one of the only times I remember that I felt a need for, you know, I felt a little bit under the pressure of time. But I really wasn't looking at a clock as far as I know. Anyway, interesting question. So when we're sleeping at night, we're really separating ourselves off yet again with less capacity, even more limited. And so can we see how it's possible that we're playing a trick on ourselves, that the mind is kind of playing a trick on itself, if you will, and while we are safe at home in bed, we're certainly not conscious of that, and we're living our life, and I've shared with you before here that there's times when I would feel like, you know, that I would be with my dad who passed away several years ago, or my brother who passed away several years ago, and other people that, you know, had, and it didn't dawn on me at all that they had already transitioned. It was just normal that I was spending time with them, right, and doing something with them. And in the case of my dad, it was usually, you know, having an argument or something. So, you know, we had different opinions about the way the world works. Imagine that, right? We all, you know, I've heard before that we all kind of have mommy issues and daddy issues, if you will. But anyway, be that as it may. We'll go back to the conversation, but I do want to share with you that we can see that the conscious self, the perception, our ability to perceive, is very unreliable. And we'll leave it with that for now, but the conscious mind is very unreliable. And what we're reading here is that Jesus is directing, right, the impulses, if you will, from the unconscious level, and those miracle impulses are under his direction, right? When we're miracle ready, when we are miracle ready. Well, how can I be miracle ready, Brother T? How can I get there? Well, we've still got quite a bit more book to read, right? So I guess it might look like it's really difficult and complicated, but it's really not. We're going to be talking about the holy instant. We've already talked about it. If you go back and listen to some earlier episodes, we definitely have talked about it. But the holy instant is really where we are joining in union and relationship with the Holy Spirit. But the Holy Spirit is nothing more than your right mind. So it is you, it is the higher self. So it's kind of like the sleeping self at night joining and realizing when you join with it, if you will, it joins with you in a dream that you would have a lucid experience. You would have an experience of realizing that you're sleeping, and then you begin to do whatever you want to do because you realize that when you're dreaming, anything's possible, right? And of course, the Miracle says we're always dreaming. So what's possible right now? Anything. Anything that you believe you can experience is what you will experience. So going back to our earlier discussion, if you believe that our governance system is working against us, then you're going to have those experiences. And if you believe that they're doing everything they can to protect us and help us survive through this experience of a pandemic, you're going to have those experiences. You are going to have the experiences, and you always have, of what you believe. So, as it's been said many times, and I'll phrase it simply as, if you want to have a different experience, all you got to do is change your stinking thinking, right? You got to change your belief system because your thinking is in alignment and congruent with your belief system. So only the levels of the Trinity are capable of unity. The levels which man created by the separation cannot but conflict. This is because they are essentially meaningless to each other. That was the last sentence in paragraph 38. And we jumped ahead. We've talked about the psyche, and I'm going to jump right on down now to the last couple of sentences. There is also a conscious level which perceives or is aware of impulses from both the unconscious and the superconscious. So Jesus is saying that he's kind of directing things, if you will, from the miracle ability, and which is under his direction, and the conscious level, which is what we're operating at when we're not sleeping at night, even though we are still conscious, but we're conscious of living a life in a dream state. At least when we wake up, we think it's a dream state, and that this is not. But we're still conscious, are we not? We're conscious. There's also a conscious level which perceives or is aware of impulses from both the unconscious and the superconscious. Consciousness is thus the level of perception, but not of knowledge. Again, to perceive is not to know. And the last paragraph here on the screen, if you're reading along there, consciousness was the first split that man introduced into himself. The first split was consciousness. Now, I want to interject this thought at this point because the Course in Miracles, where are we as conscious human beings? We are experiencing this separation in this dimension, or this experience of separation. We experience it as duality. And I had said earlier that before the separation, before there were lines and levels and degrees that we established in the separation, in the act of pretending, if you will, that we could even be separated, in that act, when we did that, what we were doing was creating or making up these lines and levels and degrees, and consciousness was the first split, right, from the separation. And it was a split, we could say, of mind. The mind is split in two. And the reason I'm bringing it up is because what we began to perceive was a two-ness instead of wholeness or oneness. So A Course in Miracles begins to communicate with us where we are. Okay, where are we? We are in the level of duality. We are in the dimension of duality, the dimension of separation. So this separation, this experience of separation, is really the base level is two-ness, and we'll call it duality. Well, what A Course in Miracles is doing for us is, this is a thought reversal system, right? Remember, this chapter is called Retraining the Mind. And I know that that's a little, can cause resistance, can cause concern, right? When we say, oh, I don't want to be retrained. But because we believe we haven't been trained, but we have indeed been trained. And that training is very efficient. It's the training of the ego mind, and it is the training of separation. It is the training of duality. It is the training of insanity, where we seem to be absolutely separate from everything else, and therefore we experience that. Remember, we experience what we believe is possible. We experience what we believe is true, and in that separation, that first split consciousness was introduced as an experience for us. Before that, there was just knowing, being whole, being one, if you can, with God. It's really hard to conceive of this because we see everything through the prism or through the glasses, if you will, through the filter of separation, duality, two-ness. But of course, the miracles takes us from duality to semi-non-duality to non-duality, and ultimately to pure non-duality, which I express, or can be said to be expressed as God is, or love is, and there's nothing else. You and God are one. So we gone from wholeness to two-ness, or oneness to two-ness, and consciousness was the first split that man introduced into himself. He became a perceiver rather than a creator in the true sense. And we're on paragraph 40. Consciousness is correctly identified as the domain of the ego. Now, the ego is a man-made attempt to perceive himself as he wished to be rather than as he is. This is an example of the creator confusion that we've spoken of before. Yet man can only know himself as he is because that is all he can be sure of. Everything else is open to question. So we go from a perception of error, really immersed in error, perception is completely erroneous, to a corrected perception. We do that through the practice of the holy instant. The ego is the self, the thinking self, that we created, literally, to continue to play out the entire ridiculous game. The Course in Miracles calls it the tiny mad idea of separation, if you will, of duality, of two-ness. But the consciousness, this conscious self, became the thinking mind. And I've shared this with you before, and I'll share it again tonight to just bring it up. And it's been said by Jesus, who's been teaching this Course in Miracles now since 1965. He taught it first to Helen Schuckman. But he said, as he was channeling through Paul Tuttle out in Seattle, Washington, Paul was channeling Raj Kaur, and Raj identified himself ultimately as Jesus. And so Raj is like, he said, that you're not God did not create you to be a thinker. And then, of course, I have a little fun with that and say, okay, let me think about that, right? God didn't create you to be a thinker. Consciousness introduced the thinking self. Before that, we were of God, of creation, of love, the ever-expanded self as he wished to be, because we're playing a game. The Adam and Eve story is a metaphor, and it simply is Eve couldn't do it by herself in this metaphor. She couldn't separate because God created you in relationship, are the children of God, so another child of God, if you will. That simply says, okay, I'll go with you and we will explore and pretend, if you will, but also now I believe that we come again and again and again, reincarnated, if you'll allow me to express it that way, Kimberly enjoy life. We don't even know where we are. We don't even know we're consciously not aware that we're safe at home in the bed or wherever we might be. The point is, being in this game of separation, being in this duality existence, is a trap. Okay, it's a self-confining existence because it's built on a thought system that's whole within itself. The thought system of the ego is complete within itself. It's just all based upside down thinking. It's all based on lies, but it sure as hell seems real, does it not? Right? So we literally did this to ourselves. This is an example of the created creator/creator confusion that we've spoken of before, because we believe literally that we make in ourselves, we've made up our life. Well, my life is this and my life is that, and today I'm making decisions about how I want the world to perceive me and who I want the world to perceive me as tomorrow, right? And every day we're spending our time really just focusing on, being the creator of our life. And so that's called level confusion, right? It's also called insanity. Everything else is open to question. Everything else is open to question. So this is an example of the created creator confusion that we've spoken of before, yet man can only know himself as he is because that is all he can be sure of. Everything else is open to question. So that's the difference between perceiving and knowing. And it's been said that we can't know as a human. We can have a corrected perception, and that's going to be as close as we could possibly get to, that would be as close as we could possibly get to knowing, but it's still a perception. So the difference, it's a very clear distinction, a line of demarcation between knowing and perceiving. But we're starting out from duality, moving towards non-duality or semi-non-duality, and ultimately to non-duality. And in non-duality, that's where we literally do then begin to recognize, that there's one more step to completion, because we're still perceiving, because we're still split, we're still in the conscious mind, thinking mind self, but we are joined at that point with spirit. So the next paragraph is paragraph 41. The ego is the questioning component in the post-separation psyche, which man created for himself. It's capable of asking, the ego is capable of asking valid questions, but not of perceiving valid answers, because these are cognitive and cannot be perceived. The endless speculation about the meaning of mind has led to considerable confusion because the mind is confused. The mind is very, very confused. Only one-mindedness is without confusion. So you see again, we've gone from two-mindedness, right? You're over there and I'm over here and whatever, and we're all separate, to one-mindedness, which is where we are joined in union and relationship with spirit. One-mindedness, wholeness. This is the reintegration. This is a process of reintegrating yourself into wholeness. It's almost like we've left pieces of ourselves all over the place. And so now we're reintegrating ourselves into wholeness. That's the process of ascension, the process of awakening. Only one-mindedness is without confusion. A separated or divided mind must be confused. It is uncertain by definition. It has to be in conflict because it is out of accord with itself. An accord, ACCORD. And it's also, we could say, out of resonance, out of vibration. It's at a different octave because everything is a vibration, everything is a frequency, and we are misaligned. We're not lined up consciously to be able to connect with, resonate with our higher self, our true self, the self that's not asleep, the self that knows and does not perceive, the self that's certain. It is the mind indeed of certainty. 42, paragraph 42. Interpersonal conflict arises from the same basis as interpersonal conflict. Let me read that again. Intrapersonal conflict arises from the same basis as interpersonal conflict. Have you ever had a conflict with anyone? Yeah, goes on all the time, right? There's conflict going on in the midst of this, as I said earlier, in the midst of this COVID-19 experience. My goodness, there's a lot of conflict going on right now, and it's global. It's going on all around the world. People are quite concerned about how this restriction of movement, this restriction of liberty, this restriction of freedom, and we don't like that, right? We don't like that at all. We don't want to be, none of us want to be told what to do, right? We don't want that. We don't want to, we're in a free country, or at least we believe we are, and we have the right to personal freedom, and we have the right to personal freedom of movement. We have the right to choose who we want to be in conflict with, right? Exactly. Yeah, the mind is always conflicted, but intrapersonal, that's conflict going on within the self. And let's see what Jesus has to say about that. One part of the psyche perceives another part as on a different level and does not understand it. This is intrapersonal conflict. This makes the parts strangers to each other without recognition. This is the essence of the fear-prone condition in which attack is always possible. Man has every reason to feel afraid as he perceives himself. This is why he cannot escape from fear until he knows, that's italicized, that he did not and could not create himself. He can never make his this intrapersonal conflict of the miracle impulses and impulses that come from the unconscious mind and the revelatory impulses that come from the superconscious mind. We're constantly being nudged. We're constantly being communicated to and with, and we're also experiencing the three-dimensional world outside of us here, right? That's input that's always going on, but there's a lot of input going on within us, at the very center of our being, in mind. And there's lots of conflict, lots of perceptions and opinions about the mind being, in the brain. And there's even for most of my life, I really believed that the mind was the brain was the mind, that there was no separation, that I existed as mind in the brain, right? But we've certainly, at least spiritual teaching and the teaching of A Course in Miracles in particular, helps us to realize that we're not the brain. We're not contained in it. The brain is kind of like our computer software that connects us on the internet tonight. We're using computers, we're using the internet, we're using technology, cameras, sound equipment, whatever. But we are communicating, we're connecting, and this is all taking place, and we're not even conscious. It's happening on the level of bits and bytes and operating systems and technology that we can't even grasp, and so we just allow it and accept it, but we don't really understand it. Really, we take advantage of it, but that is the brain is kind of like that internet, if you will. It connects the senses and brings all that, aggregates all that information, the touch and sight and smell and taste and all of those senses, right? The hearing and audio and visual, and it gives us the input from the outer world. It comes in through the brain, so the brain is really kind of like a receiver, not unlike the radio.
in our car, or maybe in our kitchen if we have one. And the point is that that's not our mind, and it's not what we are. It's just an interface to mind. So the body, just like the dreams at night, could we not argue that the dreams that we have at night, the entire landscape, the dimension of the dream itself, is wholly contained within mind, right? Every part of it, every image, every conversation, every person, everything we're experiencing in that dream is all within mind, but we travel through it as if it's separate from us. But it's really images that are played out, projected out from mind. And is it coming from brain? Well, it's connected to brain for sure, that there's an interface there, but it's not, definitely it's not all that we are. That we are much, 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 much more than we're conscious of or capable of being conscious of. And we talked about that a little bit tonight, but we are far beyond the brain that we believe we are. Intrapersonal conflict arises from the same basis as interpersonal conflict. One part of the psyche perceives another's on a different level and does not understand it. This makes the parts strangers to each other without recognition. This is the essence of fear-prone condition in which attack is always possible. Man has every reason to feel afraid as he perceives himself. This is why he cannot escape from fear until he knows that he did not and could not create himself. He, man, can never make his misperceptions valid. His creation is beyond his own error, and that is why he must eventually choose to heal the separation. Paragraph 43. Right-mindedness is not to be confused with the knowing mind because it is applicable only to right perception. You can be right-minded or wrong-minded, and even this is subject to degrees, a fact which clearly demonstrates a lack of association with knowledge. The term right-mindedness is properly used as the correction for wrong-mindedness and applies to the state of mind which induces accurate perception. It is miraculous because it heals misperception, and this is indeed a miracle in view of how man perceives himself. So this right-mindedness is really a step where we are beginning to join in union and relationship with our inner guidance system. The Holy Spirit, nothing more than your right mind, or our guides. We're not ever alone. We're always in relationship, not just out here in the physical world, but we're always in relationship in the inner world as well, the inner dimension of mind. And so we're being guided, we're being loved, we're being embraced. And when we begin to recognize that connection, when we begin to recognize that we can indeed be in dialogue with something other than our separated thinking egoic self, a whole new experience begins to reveal itself to us. And that is the result of raising your consciousness. It's the result of right-mindedness. And right-mindedness is beginning now to practice the proper use of denial. We're starting to deny that we are what we've been told by the world, even by our own thinking self, the ego mind, that we are, because all of its definitions have been in error, all of its perceptions have been in error, it's always wrong, and it's always intent on keeping us confused and conflicted. The last paragraph for tonight is 44. Perception always involves some misuse of will because it involves the mind in areas of uncertainty. The mind is very active because it has willpower. When it willed the separation, yes, you willed the separation. You and I did. You couldn't do it by yourself. it willed to perceive. Until then, it willed only to know. Before then, we were, if you will, one with God. We were not confused. We did not know separation. We did not know physical dimension. We did not know split mind. We did not know fear. We did not know sin. We did not know guilt. We did not know death. We did not know any of those things because none of those things can be known because those are perceptions. There is nothing to know in them, if you'll allow me to say it that way, because it's all illusion. Until then, it willed only to know. Afterwards, it willed ambiguously. And the only way out of ambiguity is clear perception. Remember, perception, even corrected perception, is not knowing. It's one step away from it, however, and we can let go of the proper use of denial. We refuse, we begin to ignore the thinking self. We begin to ignore those thoughts that we thought were ours all along. We begin to recognize there is something more to us, quite more to us, than we've allowed ourselves to see and to know. And the only way out of ambiguity is clear perception. The mind returns to its proper function only when it wills to know. This places it in the soul's service. Yes, our soul has a function for us. It wants to be expressed in field and form, if you will. You, as our brother Jesus, was the expression of that, Christ consciousness in field and form, in human form. And you have absolutely come here to be that because as the soul, you came here to be that expression of love in form. This places it in the soul's service, where perception is meaningless. The superconsciousness is the level of the mind which wills this. The superconscious is the level of the mind which wills this. So there's a prayer in A Course in Miracles that I had recorded at one time and had a dear friend, Lori Lefevre. She sang that for me and for us. We were working with a community, and she was one of the participants in our music ministry team and was sing on Sundays. And I was fortunate enough to get a taping of her singing, beautiful voice, and I used it as part of this prayer, and I recorded this for us, and I'm just pleased to share it with you tonight. So I'll be quiet here for a moment, and we'll listen to Lori, and you'll hear this prayer. Well, we're gonna do this prayer a lot, but this comes directly from A Course in Miracles.
Forgive us our illusions, Father, and help us to accept our true relationship with you, in which there are no illusions, and where none can ever enter. Our holiness is yours. What can there be in us that needs forgiveness when yours is perfect? The sleep of forgetfulness is only the unwillingness to remember your forgiveness and your love. Let us not wander to temptation, for the temptation of the Son of God is not your will. And let us receive only what you have given, and accept but this into the minds which you created and which you love. Amen.
I send my love over the mountains. I send my love sea. I send my love into the heavens, and it returns to me.
Isn't that awesome? Fun stuff. Well, hey, I've really enjoyed being with you tonight. I just want to say thank you. I love you. God bless you. And we'll be back next week. And, you know, if you find value and you want to share this channel with other people, maybe we can help others. But everyone that needs to be here is here. And it's the gift that you give me, and your participation in this channel is the reason that I keep showing up. And I'm really grateful for that. So God bless you. Have a great night, and we'll see you next week.